Good evening, everyone. It's great to see you all here with us tonight. Thank you for joining us. This episode that you're about to witness is our 15th education in the series entitled 21st Century Conversations on Freemasonry. As we all know, to be a brother within our Masonic fraternity is a privilege. It's an honor. So let us be mindful to utilize the tools provided to us in our education this evening to help us better understand ourselves and achieve further light in Masonry. For those of you who are returning with us tonight, we thank you for coming back. And for those of you who are joining us for the first time, thank you for being with us this evening. First, I would like to go through and recognize the Masonic sponsors and participating brothers who have helped to make these evenings possible. First, I want to thank the Rubicon Masonic Society and all the brothers therein. Rubicon is a private group of Master Mason Freemasons located in Lexington, Kentucky. Secondly, I want to thank the William O. Ware Lodge of Research. Chartered in 1965, it is Kentucky's oldest research lodge. And thirdly, and finally, I want to thank Lexington Lodge No. 1. Chartered in 1788, it is the oldest Masonic lodge in Kentucky. Alongside Worshipful Brother Dan Kimball, past master of William O. Ware Lodge of Research and recorder of Rubicon, Worshipful Brother Tom Nitsky, current master of William O. Ware Lodge of Research and member of Rubicon, Worshipful Brother John Bizak, past master of Lexington Lodge No. 1, vice chairman of Rubicon. My name is Brian Evans. I'm the past master of Lexington Lodge No. 1 and chairman of Rubicon. Again, thank you for joining us this evening. Let us proceed. First, Worshipful Brother Tom Nitsky, will you please do the honors of delivering an opening devotion?
Brethren, if you will join me. Great architect of the universe, as we gather together today for this meeting, may we be guided in all that we say or do by a strong sense of your presence with us. Grant us for our labors and the wages proper for us, the corn of nourishment, the wine of refreshment, the oil of joy. May our meeting together on this day be such that nourishes and sustains us in the work which is ours as Masons. May the friendship we share as brethren give refreshment to our spirits. May the proceedings in which we are engaged, and the friends we greet today, give us a joy that encourages us, revitalizes us, and adds deep meaning to our lives together. Amen.
So mote be.
Mote be.
Thank you, brother. Brothers and friends, the purpose of these Virtual Masonic Education series is to assist in the improvement of ourselves by establishing a deeper understanding of Freemasonry, our fraternity, and its traditions and practices, and further cementing this brotherhood of the fraternity for the betterment of ourselves and mankind. Any opinions expressed during this virtual education will be those of the presenter or participant, and they do not necessarily reflect the views of any lodge or Grand Lodge or the Rubicon Masonic Society. By participating with us, you do consent to our guidelines and our full disclaimer at rubiconmasonica.com/disclaimer. First, I would like to go through some brief protocol and recommendations, and then we'll jump right in with the business of the evening. Brothers and friends, these are not tiled meetings. Masons and non-Masons are welcome and encouraged to participate and attend. So please be mindful that anything discussed this evening should be suitable for Masons of all degrees, as well as non-Masons. Gentlemanly manners are to be expected at all times. We ask politely, no alcohol, no smoking, no food or foul language to be permitted during our meetings. There will also be no discussion of politics or religion at any time, and attendees may be removed if not following protocol. In an effort to best ensure that this virtual education will be as enjoyable as possible, we would like to recommend the following. Recommended attire for each meeting is coat and tie. Please type your name and any appropriate Masonic title in the location under your video to identify yourself to others. If you're not a Mason, please type guest after your name. Please enable your video camera so other attendees can see you tonight. Please reduce any background noise and keep your microphone muted when not speaking. Please turn off all other computer programs and try to eliminate outside distractions. And finally, please always be patient should any technical difficulties occur. Tonight's guest presenter is Worshipful Brother Pete Normand, whose knowledge of the Masonic Dining is well-deserved of your attention this evening, as there may be no more intimate way to get to know your brothers than by breaking bread with them. Worshipful Brother Bizak, would you please do the honors of introducing our special guest?
Thank you, brother. I'd be glad to. Worshipful Brother Normand is of College Station, Texas. He's one of the Masons in America that has a Masonic resume that's too lengthy to present in the space allotted this evening. Past master of both Sul Ross Lodge number 1300 and St. Albans Lodge number 1455 in College Station. He is past master as well of the Texas Lodge of Research. He's former editor of the American Masonic Review and of the Plumbline, the bulletin of the Scottish Rite Society. St. Albans was founded in 1992 and is considered the first lodge in the United States to be established using the 7 Principles of Traditional Freemasonry guidelines. A noted Masonic writer and speaker, he's also a member of the Blue Friars and current secretary at St. Albans. And for those of us this evening interested in observant lodge practices, I would refer you to one of Pete's writings that appears in Herodom, the Transactions of the Scottish Rite Research Society. In volume 19, 2011, that paper is entitled The Traditional Lodge Model. Brother Pete, thank you for being with us this evening. The floor is yours, sir.
Brother John, thank you. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Right, worshipful master, wardens, brethren. I want to talk to you tonight about the lodge at table. And I was going to read a paper, then I was talking to Brian earlier, and I thought, well, maybe I won't read a paper. Maybe I'll just make some bullet point notes, and I'll talk to you off the cuff based on those notes. And I ended up writing another paper. So I am going to read you a paper, but it's going to be in smaller bits and pieces so we can be a bit more conversational about it. During the course of this, I'm going to talk about 3 things. I'm going to give you a bit of history about the lodge at table. Secondly, I want to look at where American Freemasonry is today in relation to our table practices. And third thing is I want to talk about the practices and the terminology of the festive board. And I want to start off with a comment about the ancient landmarks. If there is such a thing as ancient landmarks in Freemasonry, then the practice of lodges conducting Masonic feasts and banquets is certainly one of them. The term table lodge was a term that was coined during the 1800s after the practice had become extinct. What they were referring to was the common practice during the previous century of lodges holding their meetings while the brethren were seated around the dinner table. Throughout the 1700s and before, this practice was not called a table lodge for the simple reason that it was the most common practice. They didn't think what they were doing was anything special. They were just having a lodge meeting. So they didn't call it a table lodge. That term, table lodge, came into use during the following century after the practice virtually disappeared. In England, during the 1800s, after the creation of the United Grand Lodge of England and into the 20th century, a formal Masonic dinner presided over by the master and wardens, which usually included toasting and singing, was called a festive board, and still is. In Scotland, it's called a harmony. The primary difference between the festive board and a table lodge of the previous century was that the lodge was called from labor to refreshment during the festive board, or in some cases, it was after the lodge meeting was closed. The British military and the British Navy quickly adopted the practice for their regimental dinners, which had the additional benefits of developing regimental traditions and fostering camaraderie among the senior and junior officers. Today, American military units conduct what is called the dining in. I attended several of these during my days in the Air Force, and they were always limited to military members. as I remember, some of the new military wives objected strenuously to seeing their husbands go off in formal mess dress to the officers club to attend a fancy formal dinner to which they were not invited. But I guess they got over it. I don't know. In the United States, during the 19th and 20th centuries, Masonic Lodge dinners became increasingly informal. Today, we all know that they are characterized by the pervasive spaghetti on a paper plate, served with a side of green beans, washed down with a styrofoam cup full of weak iced tea, and if you're lucky, you might get a piece of garlic bread on the side. In the US, if the average lodge has any kind of special meal, it is often called a banquet. And they always include the ladies as well as mothers-in-law, neighbors, nieces, nephews, and other non-Masons. For some reason, it seems that too many American Masons just cannot wrap their heads around the idea of having a formal Masonic dinner for lodge members only. But American Masons serving in Europe during the 2 world wars in the following decades were introduced to the ancient traditions of the formal Masonic feast, the festive board, with a prescribed toast list. Upon their return to the US, they wanted to introduce these customs in American lodges. An important development occurred during the 1930s that meant a great deal to the development of the festive board in the United States. Brother Frank B. Crandall of Caleb Butler Lodge at Ayer, Massachusetts, discovered an extinct ritual, an extinct French ritual in the library of the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts. In fact, it was the ritual for opening on the entered apprentice degree in the Adoniramite Rite, published in Paris in 1787. The Adoniramite Rite was a 12-degree rite that arose in France that held that Adoniram, not Hiram Abiff, was the architect of Solomon's temple. The ritual included instructions for conducting the lodge of the table, as well as a list of names used for all the dishes, glasses, and implements upon the table. Glasses were called cannons, bottles were called barrels, red wine was red powder, knives were swords, bread was rough ashlar, candles were stars, plates were tiles, etc. During my college years, I was in the Corps of Cadets at Texas A&M University, which is a full-time cadet corps. And we had the same kind of nomenclature for food, dishes, and implements on the table in our mess hall. It was a senior privilege to call things by their real name. So when you went home for semester break, you might get in trouble if you called your mother's roast bull neck, or if you asked your sister to pass the sand when you really wanted the salt. Brother Frank Crandall translated the ritual to English and instituted an annual formal dinner at his lodge, where the ritual of the lodge at table was enacted each year as an entertaining and educational tradition of his lodge. Then about 15 years later, in August 1951, Brother Crandall's translated ritual for a table lodge appeared in a short talk bulletin, August 1951. During the 1970s, this table ritual was introduced to Independent Royal Arch Lodge No. 2 in New York City by Brother John Hilliard, now a past president of the Philalethes Society. He was responsible more than anyone during the 20th century for propagating the practice of the formal festive board in America. During the late 1970s, Brother Hilliard's Adoniram Council of the Allied Masonic degrees took the festive board to Washington, D.C. during Masonic Week, where it was introduced, where it was conducted and its formal festive board were shown for many years to Masons from all over the US, who then spread it throughout the country. If your lodge or Grand Lodge uses a version of this old Adoniramite ritual, you can identify it by the answer to the question, why are we met together? The answer is to erect temples for virtue and dig dungeons for vices. If that sounds familiar to you, then you've probably attended a festive board where that extinct ritual has been exemplified. A copy of the original Adoniramite ritual in English was published in Albert Pike's Masonic Rituals and Formulas, compiled and edited by Art de Hoyos for the Scottish Rite Research Society, and was published in 2010. I'm going to show you a picture of it. This is what the book looks like. You can see it's a pretty good thick book. It was free to members of the Scottish Rite Research Society. So if you're not a member, you might want to rethink your decision to not subscribe. This was a collection of old Masonic rituals that had been in Albert Pike's possession during his life. And you can find that ritual in that volume in English. I know that a number of American Grand Lodges have adopted set procedures and even approved rituals for conducting a table lodge or a festive board. I have a collection of them from a number of Grand Lodges. Unfortunately, some of these standardized official rituals for table lodges or festive boards, rather than incorporate ancient ritual from the 18th century, which would be educational, at least for those in attendance, have become opportunities for misguided wannabe ritual writers from the, to create new ritual from scratch. Some of these Grand Lodges even consider that these made up rituals to be capable of opening a lodge at labor. What that means is that they have invented an entirely new species of lodge, a fourth species of lodge. Whereas we have historically had the Entered Apprentice Lodge, the Fellowcraft Lodge, and the Master Mason's Lodge. Now in some jurisdictions, we have this fourth kind of lodge written by somebody probably in the 1990s or later. In other grand jurisdictions, we have lodges having festive board dinners and calling them table lodges. But I want to be clear, and I feel very strongly about this. Historically, a table lodge is a lodge at labor, in a room or place where the lodge is authorized to open, with a charter displayed, the three great lights displayed, assisted by representatives of the lesser lights, with the brethren wearing their aprons, the officers wearing their jewels, and a tiler posted without the door. Then a lodge is opened on one of the 3 degrees of Masonry using the approved ritual of the jurisdiction. If you intend to open and conduct a table lodge, a lodge at labor, then you do not need a made up ritual that has been scripted by some Grand Lodge officer. Just use the ritual you've already memorized. On the other hand, if you intend to have a festive board where no lodge is at labor, and you want to present or exemplify an extinct ritual from the 18th century as an educational entertainment for the brethren, then there's no need for Grand Lodge regulation. Normally, a festive board is held around a U-shaped table, or in a small room, maybe a T-shaped table. If you have a large crowd, you might even want to have an E-shaped table with a third column. Although a festive board can become too large and should probably be limited to no more than 40 Masons, I would say. If you're having a festive board, there is no need for a ritual opening. And a prayer from the chaplain and maybe the Pledge of Allegiance is adequate. It is important that you have a toast list. My lodge uses a list of 7 toasts. We borrowed those from Independent Royal Arch Lodge No. 2 and made some modifications. And I'll read you the list. The first list we use is the loyal toast to the President of the United States. The second toast is the toast to our ancient namesakes. My lodge is St. Albans Lodge, so we toast St. Alban. If your lodge has a namesake, you should probably toast him. Otherwise, you could toast the ancient craft. The third toast is to the Grand Lodge and the Grand Master. The fourth toast is to the Worshipful Master. The fifth toast is to our visiting brethren. The sixth toast is what we call the 9 o'clock toast to our absent brethren. And the final toast is the traditional Tyler's toast. I don't recommend allowing your toast list to go over 7 toasts. I've attended festive boards that have as many as 11 toasts, and it's just far too many. You can toast with anything you like, and it's perfectly acceptable to toast with water, wheat powder, or iced tea, brown powder. Whatever you toast with, do not permit others to charge your cannon. I had a brother sitting next to me one time who always wanted to dump like a quart of wine in my glass every time we toasted. I finally had to ask him to stop. I didn't want that much wine in my glass. If you're using firing glasses, and I've got a firing glass here. I've got a collection of firing glasses because a lot of times they're souvenirs at these things. That's about the right size. And I don't fill it but about halfway, because when you're using a firing glass, you want to drain your glass each time, and you don't want it to be more than a mouthful. You know, you don't want to drink too much. You're going to have to drive home later, right? So I know how much to pour in there. The guy sitting next to me does not. Also, don't permit the brethren to offer impromptu toasts. We have a strict rule about this. Any additional toast must be presented to the Worshipful Master in private for his prior approval. And he probably won't. The only impromptu toast that I can remember is when one of our members celebrated his 90th birthday. Your lodge may want to have firing glasses, and I said I have a collection of them. But over the years, we've found that it's sort of a logistical nightmare, so we don't use them. If you have them, you can incorporate them into your salute at the end of the toast. So now I need to talk about the Masonic fire, the good fire, or what they call quick fire, which is a 21 count salute at the end of each toast. If it's given with a firing glass, you may want to do it this way. And historically, the reason for this was that you would extend your hand across the table and you would show the brother across from you that you'd emptied your glass properly for the toast. And then you'd show it to the man to your left, and then you'd show it to the man to your right. And you would do this 3 times. The first time you would draw it across your throat. The second time you would draw it across your chest. And the third time across your midsection. You know how Masons are. And then the next 3 movements would be ready, aim, fire. And everybody slammed their glass down together in unison. And then you'd finish up with 3 times 3, clap, 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 clap. 21 counts. Reminiscent of the old 21 gun salute. You will encounter this when you visit lodges around the world. One of the great things about having these festive boards is that it teaches our young Masons what they're going to encounter when they visit lodges in Hong Kong or Rio de Janeiro or wherever they may travel. And right now, our little lodge of 68 members, we have one brother who learned all of this when he was a college student from us. And he's now with the State Department stationed in Bangkok, Thailand. And he's perfectly at home attending festive boards there. We have another brother that's with the State Department that's in West Africa. So we've prepared these young men to go out and do things in the wide Masonic world. This is probably the most important part and the most entertaining part of toasting. And that is responses to the toasts. Our toast list of our toast list that I read you of 7 toasts allows for 5 responses, because there can be no response for the absent brethren because they're absent, they cannot respond, and for the Tyler's toast. So, for instance, if you toast the worshipful master, well, he's going to have to respond to that toast. So at the end, he's going to stand up and he's going to say something nice about how much he enjoys being a master of the lodge and how grateful he is for all the support he gets for all of the brethren. If you toast the visiting brethren, you're going to call upon the most senior visitor present and ask him to give a response for the visiting brethren. If you toast the Grand Lodge and the Grand Master, if you're lucky, the Grand Master's not there, but you may want to ask the district deputy to respond for him. The loyal toast, you may want to ask somebody that served in the military to respond to the loyal toast. That'll give you an idea. I don't recommend letting these brethren know that they're going to be responding. I don't recommend letting them know more than about 2 minutes before the dinner starts. I've seen it where they will email the brethren a week in advance and ask them to respond to the loyal toast. Well, you give him a week, he's going to sit down and he's going to write 3 pages. You know, and you don't want a canned response. You want an impromptu ad-libbed response. Those always seem to be better. I just attended a festive board here a couple of weeks ago, and they opted to not have responses. And it just took the heart and soul right out of the festive board. To me, those would have been the best parts of the dinner. Since our lodge has 4 of these quarterly festive boards each year, and we have other programs and speakers at 3 of these dinners, we found that we cannot use a full toast list of 7 toasts and do everything else that we want to do and have a speaker. So we have one festive board on the night of the installation of officers where we do have the full 7 toasts with, you know, the Masonic fire and the responses and all that. And that becomes the program for the evening. But at the 3 other quarterly festive board dinners, we use 3 toasts that we call Agape toasts. We borrowed this from 2 lodges, Guildhall Lodge in Oklahoma and Academia Lodge in Oakland. These Agape toasts will toast wisdom, strength, and beauty one time. Another time we'll toast the sun, moon, and stars. or we'll toast freedom, fervency, and zeal, and so forth. You know, there's any number of things in Masonry that come in threes that you can toast. And so we have these little brochures that we put together for these agape toasts, and you can get all three toasts in one little bifold brochure, and we'll give one to each of our wardens and a third brother, and we'll ask them to give these three toasts. So during one of our festive boards, we'll give one at the beginning of the meal. We'll give a second one before we introduce our speaker during the dessert course. And then we'll give the third toast right before we give the parting prayer and depart. And it works out fine. That's how we've solved one of the problems. We wanted to have toasts. We just didn't want to eat up the entire evening having 7 toasts with the responses and everything else. I guess one of the most important things I want to say to you is, if you're not actually having a table lodge with a lodge at labor, with the brethren in their aprons and the charter on the wall, if you're not doing that, don't call it a table lodge, because what you will do is you will invite unwanted regulation from on high. And next thing you know, you will have some unwieldy ritual that's been written by somebody you don't even know. Call it a festive board. Technically, a festive board is any meal the lodge has. If you have spaghetti on paper plates with watered down iced tea, that's still a festive board. It's not a very good festive board, but it's still a festive board. We had a Grand Master a few years ago who will remain mercifully unnamed. And he wanted to have a committee write rules and regulations for our festive boards. And I just finally talked to the committee and I said, what are you going to do? Are you going to write rules and regulations for having picnics and fish fries, pancake breakfasts? Where are you going to draw the line? And they couldn't answer me. So they ended up shutting down the committee, and we dodged a bullet. But we brought that on ourselves because we were calling a festive board, and this was well over 10 years ago. We were calling a festive board a table lodge, and it was not. So I hope I've driven that point home for you. And I'm going to make that my presentation for this evening, and I'll be happy to answer any questions and have discussion.
Well, Brother Pete, thank you. Excellent. Very, very good. The way you explained it was very nice, because you paint the picture in such a way where you can really visualize what it is going on at a festive board. Brothers, this is the time where we want to open it up and have some dialogue and conversations. And I'm going to start with a question to Pete. If you guys have any questions, you're more than welcome to type them in the chat. You're more than welcome to raise what's called your virtual hand, and a big yellow hand comes up on my side of the screen. And I know that you have your hand raised, so you don't have to stand with your real hand. So Brother Pete, tell us, what are some of your most memorable dining experiences, good, and maybe some or one or two that perhaps weren't so good and could have been improved upon?
Well, I'm going to say this for Marty Cantor's sake, since he's sitting out there listening. The most memorable festive boards I've attended are the ones that occur each year at the Old Ebbitt Grill in Washington, D.C. And I've attended those every year since 1991, with the exception of the year COVID shut down Masonic Week. What was that, 2020? 2021. That was last year, wasn't it? Yeah. And the brethren around that table are mostly from Independent Royal Arch Lodge No. 2 in New York. That's John Hilliard's lodge. He's the man that I credit for actually spreading the practice across the U.S. simply because so many Masons from around the US would go to Masonic Week and they would come to this festive board at the old Ebbett Grill and they would say, wow, this is fantastic. And they'd go home and do it. And that's exactly what happened to me. I went in 1991 and I found something that I didn't even know existed in Masonry. And I got a copy of their toast list and everything else and took it home, and we started doing it back home. And we've been doing it ever since, 30 years. Those are the most memorable festive boards for me, just because I see good friends that I've come to know over 30 years, and I see them once a year, many of them. Terry McCammon from Illinois, Dennis Zier from New York, Dallas Shell from Oklahoma, Bob Davis, others who come from all over the US, and if they can, will return and go to that festive board. And there's never more than about 24 at the most, simply because the room won't hold anymore. So you don't need big numbers to have a really successful festive board. When I became the personal representative of the Scottish Rite in the city of Houston, which, as you can guess, is probably one of the top 4 Scottish Rite valleys in the country in terms of numbers. For years, they'd been having a feast in September where they invited the ladies and so forth. And what we found was that, and they'd serve rubber chicken and green beans and that sort of thing, but they'd have toasts as prescribed by the Scottish Rite. And what we found was that most of the younger guys, the guys that were either single or the guys that were married with children at home, did not come. They stayed home. That was the one night that they just opted out. And at the same time, you would see large numbers of brethren with gray hair show up who hadn't been there in a year, but that was the one night they'd come to the Scottish Rite because they could bring their wife for a free meal. Rubber chicken, green beans on a paper plate. And we thought this was horrible. So when I finally became the personal rep in Houston, I said, I'm going to change this. We're going to have a 14th degree table lodge of perfection. We're actually going to open on the 14th degree in full form with all the questions and answers between the Venerable Master and the Senior Warden. And then we're going to have a dinner. We're going to have steaks. We're going to have real tablecloths. And we're going to have toasts. We're going to do the whole thing. And we're going to charge $50 a head. And the general secretary, who'd been there for, 20 years, he told me I was crazy. He said, you're not going to sell any tickets. It's going to be a dismal failure. And I said, we'll see. Normally, we would have maybe 60 people at that feast. And of the 60, 20, 25 of them would be wives. And only about 35 would be Masons. I told him, buy 150 steaks. We sold out. And we had about 6 or 7 more brethren show up that had not bought tickets in advance. And they agreed to pay the $50 for a plate that had nothing on it but a baked potato and green beans, because we didn't have any more steaks for them. When it was over, I couldn't walk across the room because there was a crowd of people crowding me into a corner wanting to shake my hand and say thank you for returning the Houston Scottish Rite to the fraternal organization it is supposed to be. So that was probably the best, even though we had 150 people, which is way too big for a good festive board. That's probably the most memorable festive board on a good note. Let me put it that way. I don't remember any bad notes. Any bad memories of festive boards. They all seem to have gone really well. If they're planned well, they go well. If there's any sour notes, it maybe sometimes the singing was not quite so good, but we still sing loudly. We raise the roof and we have a good time.
Oh, that's great. No, that's a great story. Thank you for sharing that. Brother Dan Hrinko, floor is yours.
Yes, when we formed Arts and Sciences Lodge, we wanted to embrace many traditions of ancient craft masonry from the 18th century. So we assured that a festive board happened at least once a year, typically in our June Feast of St. John meeting, which is Masons only, and it follows a rough approximation of that French ritual that Brother Norman referred to. Our Grand Lodge of Ohio does have an official table lodge ritual that requires a dispensation and opens the lodge at labor. And as Brother Norman pointed out, following the Grand Lodge procedures brings Grand Lodge oversight, which is, we find, restrictive. So we've always done a festive board as opposed to a formal table lodge with rules, and we've enjoyed it much greater. What we tend to find works best is when a 15 to 30-minute program introducing some idea, point of view is offered in the form of a speaker with some knowledge, followed by a discussion on observations or other points and counterpoints relating to that topic, which could be about anything. I think sticking with that formula of a blending enough formal elements such as the 7 toasts and a speaker and having an opening ceremony of some kind where you have columns on the north and columns on the south and people calling the hours. And of course, our purpose is to dig, temples of virtue and dungeons for vice, are all elements that make it different than just a friendly get together, yet avoiding the Grand Lodge rules allows you to have a lot of flexibility, particularly in the form of beverages in Ohio, since there are strict limits, if not prohibitions, that we are able to circumvent. So I encourage lodges to explore the idea of festive boards and make use of any resource they can, because it brings a whole new element of fraternal joy to the whole relationship.
Yeah, back in, well, it was 2013 when the Grand Master had a Grand Master's recommendation, which carries the same weight as a resolution. It's voted on by Grand Lodge and it was approved. And his recommendation was that they appoint a committee to study the whole, what he called table lodge, and to create a ritual for table lodge that would be standardized, throughout the jurisdiction. And then of course, consult with our committee on work, our grand lecturers, and of course, they'd be regulating it. And I had a long discussion with the members of that committee. And at the end of the day, I said, look, go ahead, do this, create a standardized table lodge with an opening and closing ritual. I recommend that you just simply use the entered apprentice ritual. We already memorized it. Why do you need to write a whole nother one, right? Just go ahead and use the one we've got. But if you want to have the ritual for the toasts and prescribe what the 7 toasts must be, if you want to do all that, go ahead. But you know what's going to happen? Lodges are not going to use it. They're going to have a festive board instead. And of course, they said, what's a festive board? I said, that's what we've been doing. Well, I thought you were having a table lodge. No, we've never had a table lodge. We've only had festive boards.
Thank you, brother.
So
David.
I hope I'm helping some of you figure out how to skin your own cat.
You certainly are, no doubt. Brother David, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I've had the privilege of being a founding member of Arts and Sciences with Brother Harinko, but now I live in North Carolina, a member of Traditional Observer Lodge Sophia. And just kind of a brief description of what we do here. Maybe 4 to 3 times a year, we'll bring in a renowned Masonic speaker on a Saturday. Open lodge. Being a TO lodge, we go through all how you do a TO lodge, and then we go to refreshment and have the speaker talk about their particular topic. Then we go back into labor and close the lodge. Then that evening, we'll have what we call down here a harmony or a festive board. With all the things you've talked about, but at the what I really enjoy and I found very, very cool is at the end of each toast, we sing. We're blessed with some musical talent where some of our brothers have adopted known music to something might be unique to North Carolina, but there's a song at the end of each toast, and that's certainly a lot of fun to add to that. And then again, the speaker had already been talking in lodge, but then again, he still has something else to say during the harmony. So it's really adds to the evening. Thank you.
Yeah, we sing after all of our toasts, so after the loyal toast, we sing America the Beautiful. After the toast to the Grand Lodge and the Grand Master, of course, we sing Texas, our Texas. I invite you all to do that. The toast to our ancient namesakes, we sing Amici, which we borrowed from Independent Royal Arch Lodge No. 2 up in New York. After we toast the Worshipful Master, of course, we always sing For He's a Jolly Good Fellow. For our visiting brethren, we sing It's a Long Way to Tipperary. I remember that Adoniram Council used to sing that for the toast to the Grand Council. It's a long way to Tipperary. After the 9 o'clock toast to our absent brethren, we sing Old Lang Syne. And then we have a closing hymn that we sing following the Tyler's toast. But what I have found a lot of times is that lodges that borrow our ritual, and of course, we encourage lodges to borrow our ritual, our little booklet that has the toasts and the opening and closing with the Adoniramite ritual and all that. We've encouraged lodges to borrow that and use it. But what we found is that a lot of times they not only cut out the responses, but they cut out the singing. So in other words, they've taken the best parts out of the festive board in order to shorten it up for some reason. So that's a shame.
Yeah. We have a question that came in through chat. This is Worship Brother Tom Nitsky with Rubicon. He says, "If you're curious to know your thoughts on what you believe may have caused the decline of the table lodge in the early 1800s."
Probably several factors. In England, I think after the union of the two Grand Lodges, the ancients and the moderns, you had the creation of the United Grand Lodge of England, and they probably started regulating the practices of lodges. And it was that Grand Lodge regulation that probably killed the practice. The other thing was that lodges began to have more space to meet. So if they had their own building, well, they had a lodge room where they held their meeting, and then they had a dining room where they'd go eat. And so they were separating the two activities, the lodge meeting from the actual dinner. And so that was when they actually created the whole business of going from labor to refreshment. I don't think that was part of ritual until after the union of the two Grand Lodges. And what they were doing was they were leaving the lodge room to go out and eat. So they went from labor to refreshment. Well, once they were at refreshment, there was no table lodge. It was just simply a festive board.
Good, thank you.
And by the way, my lodge goes to a hotel to eat dinner. We meet at 7. We limit our meeting to 1 hour. We do not read the minutes. We hand everybody a copy of the minutes and we ask them to review them and make any corrections. And that limits the length of our meeting time, our 4 quarterly meetings. And then when those meetings are over at 8 o'clock, everybody jumps in their car and drives to the hotel downtown. And we have a private dining room where we have a U-shaped table set up and we have a steak dinner and we have a festive board. And that's how we do it. And so the question is, so when do you take care of all your business if you limit your meetings to only 1 hour? Well, we have 3 business meetings throughout the year. Those are not followed by festive boards. And sometimes those meetings will drag on to an hour and a half. And by the way, that's when the district deputy comes. He comes to those business meetings. So.
Yeah, good point. Brother Clayton, go ahead. Clayton, you're muted.
Clayton is from Bryan. He's just down the street from me.
All right, Clayton, we'll come back to you. Brian Carroll, go ahead, brother.
Good evening. Wonderful presentation. Thank you very much for sharing. Question I had more or less was when you start to think about just the basic terminology of a festive board versus a Masonic dining experience or things like that, do you think that as Masons we try to overcomplicate things and just make it more than it should be?
I think that's a natural tendency on the part of Masons. You know, I was demonstrating how in the old days they would take their firing glass and make a triangle 3 times. And, you know, then they said, no, you have to do it across the throat the first time, then across. So they just made it more and more complicated. I mean, that's just the nature of things. So if you do this 4 times a year, the way we do, you learn which elements are unnecessary and you cut them out. And that's why we don't have firing glasses, because it just became a logistical nightmare. Is everybody going to remember to bring their own firing glass? What if they don't bring their firing glass? Are we going to make the stewards bring the firing glasses? Or are you going to have to carry around a big wooden case that has all the little firing glasses in it with people's names next to it? You know, at what point does it become too complicated? So we don't use firing glasses. By the same token, we don't use the full 7 toast list 4 times a year because we just felt like that was just a bit much. So we do it once a year with the 7 toasts, and then the rest of the time we've shortened it to 3 toasts. And that gives us more time to have a speaker and a presentation. So.
Thank you very much.
And by the way, as I said, you don't need to open with this Adoniramite ritual. You can open with a prayer and a pledge of allegiance and have your dinner and have your toasts and close. You don't have to have the opening and closing ritual. That's just something that we do once a year for the fun of it.
We have a question here asking for you to speak a little bit in more detail about Agape toasts and how those meetings go a little bit differently.
I'm gonna read one for you. Well, I say I am. Nope. I was hoping I would have one handy. Here we go. Nope, that's not it either. Well, these agape toasts are meant to allow us to have 3 toasts. And have them be Masonic in nature, but to shorten the amount of time that it takes for the toasts. And so, as I said, we just have a little bifold brochure, just sheet of paper folded in half. Looks like a program. And on the inside of that, you will have the 3 toasts. And so a toast would begin like this. The worshipful master has a gavel, of course, because he's seated at the head table, and he will gavel for everyone's attention, and he'll say, "Brethren, I'm about to call for the first toast to be presented by Brother Jones." And so Brother Jones then stands up, and he's got his little bifold brochure that's been canned for him in advance. And he says, "Brethren, please be upstanding for the first toast, which I have the pleasure to offer to wisdom." Okay. And so then he reads a short paragraph that comes right out of the monitor about wisdom, which, has to do with the 3 pillars, Ionic, Doric, and Corinthian. And then at the end of reading that, he will say, "Brethren," and by the way, this is important, "Brethren, repeat after me, wisdom." And everybody repeats wisdom. And he says, "Fire," and everybody drinks. That's the toast. Saying, "Brethren, repeat after me," and then saying what you're going to say, and then having them repeat it is important, because if you don't say, "Brethren, repeat after me," they don't know to do that. It just makes things go a lot smoother. I made a list of things in Masonry that come in 3s, and we just rotate around through them. It takes several years to go all the way through them and get back around to wisdom, strength, and beauty again.
We do a festive board. Lexington Lodge No. 1, Rubicon, are there. William Ware and a few others are the primary sponsors and organizers of that. And John, remind me, are we on our 10th one, or would it be 11th coming in August?
This will be our 11th coming up.
11th. And John's been kind of the mastermind behind that since we started that 11 years or so ago. John, do you have any thoughts or comments on what we've heard tonight? And better yet, any really, really good ideas that we can steal from Brother Pete and use in our meetings?
Brian, let me ask a question, and maybe John can even answer. And that is, so you only have one festive board a year?
We do. We started that when we didn't have a lot of interest in festive boards, and it's not just for our lodge. We open it up to, of course, all degrees, but brothers around the state. We get brothers from out of state, particularly Ohio, Virginia, and Tennessee. But we've kind of formed an approach that is ideal for our purposes, as you've often mentioned. We incorporate 7 traditional toasts. We have many of the same songs you talked about tonight.
Sure.
And we're a little bit more formal, and we enjoy that formal atmosphere. And we don't try to push that on any other lodge. We do what's comfortable for the brothers who attend these and what they want. And that keeps our attendance high. So we've kind of cannibalized from everything from the Scottish harmonies. I think we've looked at a few things from you and College Station over the years. We've taken some things from some lodges in Massachusetts and Virginia, and at Masonic Week, of course. So it's a combination. It's a hybrid of the things that keep our people interested.
Right. So let me ask, this is your lodge that has this. So how many meetings does your lodge have a year?
We have 24 meetings, stated meetings a year.
I
But the
see.
Festive Board is one of those things that became an annual event for a particular reason, because we hold it at a place called Spindletop Hall in Lexington. And that's owned by the University of Kentucky, and it's a grand old home with a huge facility that accommodates up to 100 people in a setting that we really like. Having that available all the time doesn't work, because they do a lot of weddings and events there. So we have to plan well in advance. Of course, nothing keeps us from doing that on a more regular basis someplace else, but we prefer the annual approach.
Yeah, I like that. So you have 24 meetings a year. Do you eat dinner following those meetings?
Usually during the pandemic, of course, that was suspended.
Right.
This year, we've got a little different approach. We have two stated meetings, but the second stated meeting, the master takes the lodge to eat or refreshment, and we retire to the dining room, and we have a very informal education discussion, a Socratic method. Then go back in and close lodge. We do that. Been doing that this year every second meeting of the month.
Okay. And during those second meetings, do you sit at round tables or long rectangular tables, or?
Well, our dining room has about a dozen to 15 round tables.
I see.
It's very casual.
Yeah.
Dress formal, but it's a casual event in the dining room, and it opens up a lot of conversation.
I see. Okay. Well,
The dining part of our events has usually always taken place before the meetings. So a meeting starts at 7. We'll eat before the meeting. Meal starts at 6:30. And the primary reason for that is just simply because sometimes our meetings go long, and it would be too late to have a dinner after the meeting.
and I want to jump in here and tell you that for about 20 years, we had a problem at our lodge. And the problem was that we wanted to be a formal lodge, and we wanted our meetings to be really special Masonic events. We wanted the brethren to feel like they were having a great lodge experience when they came to lodge. The problem was we had to approve minutes. We had to get a treasurer's report. We had to have committee reports. We had to elect officers once a year. We had to have the district deputy a couple of times a year. And there were so many other items of business. We had to ballot on new affiliations. There was just so much business that had to be conducted at these meetings that honestly, it ruined the meetings. The business ruined the meetings. And we struggled with how to deal with that. One night, the meeting lasted so long that we got to the country club for our festive board, and we were late, and the chef was angry because he had to put all the steaks back in the oven to keep them warm. He had to wash all those plates, and then he had to replate all the food a second time because we were 30 minutes late showing up. We had to fix this problem somehow. So what we did about 10 to 15 years ago, I don't remember the exact year, we had an officers meeting, and we decided that what we were going to do was we were going to have 4 quarterly meetings where the business would not mess up the meeting. And we call that a lodge of light. We process into a darkened lodge room lit by candles. There's often 1 or 2 little items of business that must be taken care of, but that doesn't take more than 10 minutes. And then the rest of the meeting is devoted to a theme. So if the theme is the checkered pavement, then we'll have 2 readings. And these readings are usually about 1 to 2 pages long, double spaced, and they're taken from respected Masonic authors that we can just pull them out of well-known books. And these 2 readings last about 10 minutes each, but they'll be about the checkered pavement if that's the theme for the evening. And those are separated by about 4 minutes of classical music. And when that's over, we close. And we're always able to close in 1 hour. And so the guys can come, they can have a 1-hour meeting, feel like they've learned something, feel like they've had a special meeting, and then we go to our festive board. Now, we haven't figured out how to fix the business meetings because those are still long and boring. But it allowed us, by separating the two, it allowed us to have 4 really good meetings and then have 3 business meetings that are packed with boring business. Now, if anybody wants to steal that and take it home with them, that's great. I feel like I've done something.
No, you've thrown out a couple good nuggets that we're gonna borrow. Appreciate it. Clayton, you have a question?
Well, more just I guess to add, first of all, brother Pete, it's good to see you again. I sacked up and I'm in Denver nowadays, but can still, thank God just for Zoom, right? We can still join from afar. But I remember going to St. Albans and being just blown away at the way that lodge is conducted, the way that they do their festive boards. But even more so when I came here, being a Texas Mason, it blew my mind sitting at a real table lodge, like with my apron on, like legitimately lodge, like real lodge, not a festive board, not to say that this is a slight, because that we got to do what we got to do, right? But under Texas, Grand Lodge law. But it was just mind-boggling here how commonplace table lodges are, and
In Colorado?
Yes. And they got like a formal ritual for it. I mean, it's
Well, I'm sorry, let me interrupt and say
Right.
we didn't start doing festive boards because we were avoiding Grand Lodge regulation. We just, in Texas, the only way we could have had a table lodge was if we set up the tables in the lodge room and then got steak sauce on our aprons. And we just didn't want to do all that. It was a logistical nightmare. It was far easier to go to the country club and have a steak dinner and have a festive board and let somebody else cook the meal and let somebody else wash the dishes and just go enjoy ourselves. And so that was why we started having festive boards.
Well, it's very common for multiple lodges here to meet in the same building, which is very not a thing in Texas, right? And then secondly, it's also very common for lodges. It's popular for lodges to consolidate when they see the writing on the wall. It's kind of wanted by both the dying lodge and the lodge that's absorbing them. And they kind of wear it on their sleeve, like in their lineage. When you go see them, they're like, hey, this is Marquis de Lafayette, 41, and then they'll go and they'll just list the laundry list of lodges that they've absorbed. But that being said, they share one lodge room and they have a big building, in downtown, and it's their own private dining room, right? So it still is tiled, but nonetheless, I mean, it's still just the concept of having a real table lodge where you're, doing cannons and doing toasts and stuff. Again, that for me as a Texas Mason, that mixing in our lodge room, right? I mean, that can set some fires off big time. Alcohol and masonry, like, in the lodge room, right? But here it seems it's like white on rice. I mean, it's not taboo. It seems to be, and it honestly seems to be working very well. They don't have near as many Masons here, but they don't have as many people, But the health of the lodges are really strong. They do so much more than business. I haven't been to a stated meeting here yet where minutes were read. But almost everything that I love about St. Albans is like on borderline standard. Like it's not. I mean, I don't mean that standard, but I mean they just it's taken on a different level here. The people take it very serious. Masonic education is a fundamental part of lodge. You will not sit in lodge without a 10-minute or 15-minute learning something about, so.
That's great.
Anyhow, it's good to see everybody. I'm sorry. I'm done.
No, thank you for chiming in. We appreciate it. If you guys have any other thoughts or questions or comments, this would be the time to build up the courage to ask them. You know, Pete, this has been a really good, refreshing education personally for me. We just went through, I'm not sure if you're fully aware, but for the past year, we have been producing a documentary exactly about a festive board, Masonic dining experience. It's called the Masonic Table. And I'll play the trailer at the very end. And that is it'll be an hour in length. It's going to premiere at the Masonic Restoration Foundation. So if anyone who's going to that, it will be premiering there for the first time. We hope to have it streaming mid-April. So we will let everyone know for sure exactly when that will be available on streaming devices. But that was a pretty unique experience. We were there at a Masonic dining event for 18 hours. And I'm pretty sure that everyone who participated in that evening was glad to get out of there when it was over. Now 18 was the production company's total hours, but the point was we were trying to capture this event, which we couldn't gather and do during a time of COVID. And there was a little break in the spread where we could meet and gather. So we had about 30 brothers come together. We had everything scripted, a form and order laid out. Andrew Hammer was there, and it turned out really nicely. And be curious to get your thoughts when you see that when it comes out as well. But this has been very insightful for me personally. So thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
Brother Bruce, go ahead.
The experience I had a couple of years ago here in Cincinnati was our local FMDOA, First Masonic District, and our Prince Hall brothers did a festive board or a table lodge. I forget which they called it, but both were invited to it. The one thing that most of it was similar to what Brother Pete has been describing. The one time that I do remember a good friend of mine who played the part of chaplain that night had been aware of something that was dear to both groups, and that was that at one of the cemeteries here in Cincinnati, some of the fallen soldiers from the Civil War did not have markers on their graves. And so we passed, and I guess it was known beforehand, so a lot of pledges came. We didn't have to do the markers because the Department of Defense would do those, but we did need the concrete bases for them. So the money was raised for that. But it was a very successful money raising event, along with the night of gathering and learning something new. So, you can always incorporate that too. But it was a nice event of getting our Masons with the Prince Hall Masons together for a nice event. So I offer that as a possibility for something to do to meet some of those Masons. Do you want me to talk about the other thing I told you about in chat, Brian?
Sure, if you want to mention that briefly, sure.
Okay, thank you. Brethren, the Black Watch Masonic degree team from Scotland is going to be first in Washington, D.C., and then they're coming to the greater Cincinnati area, and they will be putting on their degrees. I'm not exactly sure of those dates, but I know that they will be attending my home lodge, Kilwinning Lodge, which was named after Mother Kilwinning Lodge over in Scotland. And that date of our inspection is April 27th. And we meet for supper beforehand, and then lodge begins at 7 o'clock. So if you are able to get here and you're in the area, which Dan Kimball, I would like to extend that invite to you, especially since you're right across the river. And then on Saturday, April 30th, there is a farewell reception for the group, and it's a cost of $35, and it can be ordered from 32masons.com. It's going to include food, beverages, and entertainment. And it's a way to thank the Scottish brethren for coming to us. And we've been doing this, I think it's every 2 or 3 years. Our degree team goes over there, their degree team comes over here, and it's from Masons all across Ohio that become part of the Master Travelers group. And Brother Harenko, are you familiar with any of the team from up in your neck of the woods?
No, I'm not really familiar with the team, but I have attended that particular group's presentations at the Dayton Temple.
Okay.
If you wouldn't mind just adding anything in the chat, Bruce, and if anybody that's interested, they can connect with you there.
Okay.
Brother Pete, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but is there any way that you'd be willing to perhaps share some resources that you could send to me personally regarding anything we discussed tonight, toasts, songs, form and order of any kind, that I could then go through and share with everyone who joined tonight?
I would be very happy to toast list. I can send you the toast list and the opening and closing ritual that's used by Independent Royal Arch Lodge No. 2, and I'll send you the one that's used by St. Albans Lodge, which is very, very similar, of course, because we just simply pirated theirs. The only caveat is that if you use either one of them, even if you amend it, that you give credit to John Hilliard and Independent Royal Arch Lodge No. 2 in a caption somewhere, saying that's where it came from, because that's where I got it. And any lodge that I have loaned it to use, I've asked them the same thing, and they've all done that. John Hilliard is now living back in New Mexico, where his family is from. He went to New York City years ago, back in the early 70s, to go to school, and ended up being an administrator at New York University. And that's why he affiliated with Independent Royal Arch Lodge No. 2 and became past master and secretary there. And that's what he was doing when I met him back in the early 90s. One thing I want to add, because it came to mind while I was listening to Brother Steinhardt, and that is it's great to use a festive board as a special occasion, whether you have a joint dinner with the Prince Hall Masons or another lodge across town, or do it once a year on the night of your installation of officers, or however you want to do that. That's great. One of the things I would like to see lodges do is to start using the festive board as a more common and a more usual practice for the lodge at table. That's how we've become comfortable with it, just simply because we do it 4 times a year. So I want people to think about that in addition to using it as a special event once a year.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that'd be great. And if you wouldn't mind to just add that citation in the materials that you send over, and I will ensure that that is passed along. And I have no doubt that everyone will be happy to offer that credit.
Surely.
So thank you. Brothers, we're about to proceed to close out the evening. Brother Pete has been very gracious with his time. We don't want to keep him too late. So if there are any other final comments, this would be the time. Otherwise, we're going to move on. The only other thing I might add, and Brother Pete, you can have the last word on the Masonic Dining topic for this, is brothers, don't overthink it. You're having a meal with brothers that you care about. Put on a suit, put on a tux, find a nice place, get some reservations, and get together with your brothers and break bread. And if you follow a form and order that Pete will share with us and I'll share with you, then it's not that complicated. So the key is to actually take action in this process, and you'll learn from your experiences. and enlist assistance from the brothers in your lodge to help out.
I'll add one thing to that, and that is that to make it run smoothly, you may want one brother to be sort of a master of ceremonies, who assists the worshipful master and kind of helps organize it.
Good point. Good. Actually, well, now you need to mention that a little bit further. So talk about the master of ceremonies, because it's a pretty large role in everything that we have done in a festive board.
Well, when I started going to the festive boards at Adoniram Council in Washington, D.C. at the old Epic Grill, you know, the sovereign master each year, it was the first time he'd done it. So year after year after year, the sovereign master was always the new guy. You know, he wasn't experienced at presiding over a festive board. And so John Hilliard always played the part of the master of ceremonies. And he was always sitting there close by to whisper in the master's ear and say, okay, now you have to call for the third toast, or now you have to do this, or now you have to do that. And so the master of ceremonies can play a really important role sitting to the side of the master without him being on the hot seat. The master's on the hot seat, so he's the one that needs the help.
Great point. Yep, great point. And that will actually be shown in detail in the documentary for anyone that is interested to learn more about the master of ceremony. Brother Pete, thank you for your time.
You bet.
Brothers, we're going to move on. And as you can see on your screen, next month, we will be having Brother Randy Sanders joining us for the evening. Brother Sanders, we don't have an exact presentation topic for him yet, but I'm very inclined to expect a presentation on something esoteric. So if you're able to join us next month, we would look forward to seeing you at that meeting. Are there any other final comments from the brothers of Rubicon or William Ware or Lexington Lodge No. 1 that you would like to mention this evening? Brother Tom?
Worship Brother Brian, I'd like a few comments.
Please.
Just to say, Worship Brother Norman, I appreciate your presentation tonight. Your answer to my question earlier regarding the decline in table lodges was pretty much mirrored my research I've been doing lately with the Union of the Ancients and the Moderns, and moving into regular lodge halls. So I appreciate that answer. So thank you again for coming here tonight and giving a great presentation. Also, just would like just real quick just to mention, William and Ware Lodge Research will have our stated meeting March 30th at 7:30. So anyone that's in the area of Covington, Kentucky, we will be having our stated meeting and presenter of Heather Calloway. She's a professor from Indiana University, and she's in charge of their fraternal collections. And she will be having a paper on saving fraternal history, one lodge at a time. So if you can join us, we'd love to have you. Thank you.
Great. Worship Brother Dan, Worship Brother Bizak, any other comments you would like to make this evening?
Just to thank Pete again for your time, Pete, and it's always a most interesting presentation. Always a pleasure to see you. Thank you.
I will echo Worship Brother Bizak and just thank Worship Brother Norman for his presentation this evening. Very informative. And as always, it's a pleasure to be in the company of good men.
Well said. Thank you. Brothers, as I have mentioned in previous meetings, Rubicon Masonic Society is now a charitable organization, 501c3. We appreciate any support that is offered to us. And for those of you that have supported our mission for Masonic education, we thank you. And any charitable donations can be contributed using the information on your screen. Worship Brother Tom, would you please do the honors of delivering our closing devotion?
Brethren, if you'll join me. Grand Architect of the universe, ruler of heaven and earth, now that we're about to separate and return to our respective places of abode, wilt thou be pleased so to influence our hearts and minds that we may, each one of us, practice those great moral duties which are inculcated in Freemasonry, and with reverent study and obey the laws which thou hast given us. Amen.
So mote it be. Brothers, I want to thank you all again for joining us. Our next meeting is on April 25th, 7 p.m. Eastern. If you know of anybody who is interested in joining our meetings, please ask them to RSVP at rubiconmasonicsociety.com/RSVP. If you're able to stick around a few more minutes, assuming no technical difficulties, we'll be playing the trailer of the Masonic table right after this slide. Thank you all for joining us. Keep all sick and distressed in your prayers and trust in God with all your heart. It's a pleasure seeing you tonight, brothers.
Throughout the world, formal Masonic dining is as commonplace as the square and compass. And it always has been. However, in the US, the practice has fallen away so noticeably the document that has referred to it in the past 100 years laments the fact that it's fallen. Some lodges may follow very traditional forms of toasts, salutes, and songs, where other lodges may have a more simpler protocol, one that has a more natural and spontaneous feel. Regardless of how a lodge goes,
I'm sorry, brothers.
Experience, any lodge that does so brings this important component of Masonic fellowship back to life within its walls. And by so doing, more enthusiastically install that noblest of Masonic aspirations into the practice of our craft.